Today, we're going to look at another character that is introduced in the book of Revelation. And while it appears this is a new character, it's not. Do you remember the principle we're using as we read these different scenes of prophecy? Repeat and enlarge. In other words, expand, give more detail. That's the enlargement of what's previously given. And so we'll see this principle again in Revelation chapter 17 and 18. And so that's where we're going here tonight. Now, Revelation 13 and 14, as we saw, there's a chart there yesterday where we started with 13 is this alliance, Antichrist alliance between the sea beast and the earth beast or the land beast. And then chapter 14 is God's people who have a message that is the antithesis of that one, the alliance message, and it is a message that is coming from God and his people who are identified there in chapter 14. Then on the heels of that, we see the great harvest. Okay? So this is a progression that we've been following throughout the book of Revelation, and now we're getting a little deeper into that book. We're at chapter 17. The entity introduced in chapter 17 is Babylon. Thus the title tonight is The Rise and Fall of Babylon. Now, most times when you use the term Babylon today, or just express, someone, what about being in Babylon or something, what do people think of? You have any ideas? I'll tell you what the Christian world thinks of, and also what the secular world mostly thinks of, is that Babylon is Hollywood. Some have expanded that to be kind of like secularism, atheism, entertainment, even on a broader scale, that is kind of fed or fueled by that kind of mindset. But this whole idea really kind of took the America by storm in the late 50s in a book called Hollywood Babylon. And it was really meant to be a tell-all book by Kenneth Anger, who called attention to all the immorality in Babylon of the time. Well, it's only progressed from there, but the name stuck. So this is kind of the idea, and it permeates through other things. Babylon is out there where we're safe as a church in here. Again, that mentality that, deception and lies and false teachings aren't in the church, they're outside. And that's not what we're going to see here tonight yet again. Now, to learn what Babylon means, I think we need to go back in history. Remember how I said history is so important for understanding prophecy and understanding where we're going today, because we've already been there of yesteryear. And so history shows that there were 4 Babylons. The first Babylon was the city of Babylon. And it's actually the story, which we'll look at in a minute, of the Tower of Babel, or Babel. And we'll read that here in a minute in the book of Genesis. But it's called a city. It's a city of Babylon. And that name Babylon, by the way, is Babel. Like even the empire of Babylon later on, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, it's Babel, okay? So these are synonymous words, essentially. All right, the second term, the second Babylon is the Old Babylonian Empire. The Bible doesn't mention this empire. This is around the time of, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all the attention there was on the Promised Land and, of course, Egypt and other things. So the Old Babylonian Empire really isn't mentioned in the Bible, but it definitely is in history. And then number 3 is the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and that is the kingdom that first began with, Neopalassar, I think was the first king. But anyway, after him was King Nebuchadnezzar, and we know that king. We've already looked at him. So that's the Babylonian Empire of Daniel's day. And then the last Babylon The fourth Babylon is the end time Babylon, which is in Revelation chapter 17. So those are our Babylons. Those are what we have to go by. Again, another principle is if you want to understand what the Bible's telling you in prophecy, when it uses these terms, where do you go to look? Go back to the original term as it's used in Scripture elsewhere and find out what was going on. Not only in this story, not only in the word and what it means, but in a few passages, it'll give you around it. Now, I'll practice this. I'll use this principle here in just a few moments. But it'll tell you a little bit about end-time Babylon by looking at the city of Babylon and the Neo-Babylonian Empire. All right, in Genesis 11, we have this civilization that has grown significantly because it's been quite a while since the flood, and there is a large population, and they were residing for the most part in one place. And the Lord essentially said, he's looking at them and he says, I don't want them to just be in one place. Mesopotamia, I don't want them just to be here. I want them to scatter. I want them to go elsewhere. And so they're working together to build what they call as a city. And in that city, there's a tower, this large tower that was to rise up to the heavens. And the language there is almost like we're going to be higher than any flood that could come in the future, right? And it says in Genesis 11, verse 4, they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. And this is when the Lord came down and confused their language. The people that were building and working together to build could not communicate with each other anymore. It was like useless. They couldn't get anything done. And so they separated, I presume, by languages. They separated, went in different directions, and then we have the world becoming more populated with different people groups everywhere. In verse 9, it says, therefore, its name is called Babel or Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Okay, so the name Babel, if you look up the name in just any kind of a Bible dictionary or something, and you look up the meaning, it means confusion or confused by mixing. That's the literal interpretation of that. Confusion or confused by mixing. As if a person babbling on. What are you talking about? It has that connotation. Secondly, confused talk. Someone that just makes no sense, no reasonable sense. You don't get it. It's just, I'm not hearing you. I don't understand what you're saying. And then there is this mixing, the idea of mixing two things that don't fit together. Like truth and error, they don't mix. Okay, pure, corruption, doesn't mix. Righteous, sinful, doesn't mix, all right? So confusion happens through mixing concepts like this. So this is our first indication as to what this entity Babylon in Revelation is really all about. It creates confusion, doesn't make a lot of sense, and there's a lot of mixing of things going on. So, you have some truth, but then you've got a lot of error. By the way, do you know what the most dangerous kind of error is? The one that's got a lot of truth. If there was a bottle on your shelf and it had in big words, poison, you wouldn't be tempted to drink it. But what if it had poison in a little writing and all the other stuff that was in there looked enticing? You might actually use it or drink it. So in this respect, that is the most dangerous kind of error. That is also the most deceptive kind of error. And that's really what we're looking at today, this confused mixture of what is true, but yet a lot of what is error. But there is something else we need to take from this story that I really want to take with us throughout the rest of tonight. And that is this. It says the people wanted to do things their own way instead of God's way. Okay? Their own way instead of God's way. Let's build the city for ourselves. Okay? And in essence, this is disobedience to God. We don't want to follow God's way. We're going to do it our way. And I would ask you, is that spirit still pervasive today, would you say? Yeah? The second part of that in that previous text was that they wanted to make a name for themselves as opposed to taking the name of God, Yahweh, right? And that's outright rebellion. It's like we're going to create our own government. We're going to create our own system. We don't want the name of God. We want our own name. And that's outright rebellion. So you have this disobedient intention kind of attitude, and then you have this rebellious attitude that's mixed too. So Babylon and its meaning, if you carry it forward into this system that we're going to look at, this entity in Revelation 17, it's not just about confusion by mixing things. It's also a spirit. There's a spirit of disobedience there. There's a spirit of rebellion. It's an antichrist kind of attitude. Antichrist meaning not just against Christ, but in place of Christ even. Doing things their own way with their own system. And we'll add to that here in the near future, religious system. In 1 John 2:22 it says, "Who is a liar? But he who denies that Jesus is the Christ. He is Antichrist who denies the Father and the Son." Again, 2 John 7-9, "For many deceivers have gone out into the world who do not confess Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an Antichrist." In these two contexts, both of these verses aren't speaking about the Antichrist. It's talking about kind of the attitude and the spirit of Antichrist that inhabits people who don't believe Jesus has come in the flesh and other things. They're deceivers or whatever. So it's not just about Babylon, this Antichrist power and alliance in the last days. There's really a little of Antichrist in a lot of what's going on today. Romans 12, verse 2, Paul weighs in on this in a little roundabout way, but he does. He says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind," right? "That you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." Don't be conformed to the world's attitude, the world's spirit, the world's anti-God rhetoric. Don't be conformed to that, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And where does your mind get renewal? By the Word of God. The Word of God is sharper than any two-edged sword. And it does what? It cuts up the way we think, and it replaces it with truth. Truth we can trust, and truth we can live by. Today, the world is being conformed to an image. It's the spirit of the dragon. It's an image that is anti-God, even sometimes unintentionally. But just a decision, I want to do it my way. And here's the interesting part. There really is no independence in the world. You can't say, I don't want to serve Satan, I don't want to serve God, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm sorry, you just defaulted to Satan's side. There is no our own way because of what resides and what lives beyond us that has control of this world and control of our hearts, which are naturally sinful. We are all at one point in time, and I would say every day, are being conformed to one image or the other. The reason I keep saying image is because if you remember, Revelation 13, this image that's set up, and they want people to worship the image to the beast, of the beast. This image is important. An image is character. It's our essence. It's who we become. We become Christ-like, or we become devilish, one or the other. About 1,500 years ago, or I shouldn't say 15 years ago, 1,500 years after that first city of Babylon was erected, you have in the land of Shinar, it says, the still Mesopotamian area of the world, Neo-Babylon that rises. It rose to power in about 626 BC, and it was the Babylon of Daniel and his friends' day. The Babylon that was bringing young men from Jerusalem to Babylon to learn, to go to school, and to help lift up and expand the kingdom of Babylon itself. Now, God used Babylon to chastise his people, to discipline his people. They had been in rebellion for a while. I think if I remember right, the last revival was Josiah, I think before that. Ever since then, it was just downhill, and it was downhill again, not just downhill. It was kept, there was lots of downs, but this was that last down, and God finally said, I'm sorry. I'm going to send Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon to take you captive. And he even told the king through prophets, he said, do not resist. Do not resist. If you resist, it'll only cause problems for you. The capture, so to speak, will only be more severe. Just surrender, go to Babylon, this is my will. Well, they did resist, and there was that last assault on Jerusalem was not pretty. The walls were burned down, the temple was destroyed, other things. But this is the Babylon we're talking about here, and there are some things to learn about this Babylon, because God wanted to discipline Israel, or Judah, the southern kingdom at the time. Israel had already fallen off the world stage around 721 BC. And this is the early 7th century, around 620s, and even a little after that. But he wanted them to learn something. But instead of Babylon allowing them to just live out their lives within Babylon, the empire, not just the city, but the broader empire, Babylon did something else. It went too far. And so here's something else we can learn about Babylon when it comes to God's people in the last days as well. I'm going to put up a list. These are just the different texts you can find, all from the book of Isaiah. And you can see just some of the things. They contended against the Lord. This is Babylon speaking. Proud against the Lord. Children of Israel were oppressed. Sword against her false prophets. There were false prophets in her midst. The evil they have done in Zion. In other words, they did evil to the people of Israel and in southern Judah. They caused the slain of Israel to fall. And so he's going to bring judgment on her carved images, another allusion to worshiping of carved images and other things. So Babylon, when that word Babylon is used in Revelation 17, it's everything of what we just spoke about. It's our way, not God's way. It's we want our own name, not God's name. It was the spirit, the attitude of rebellion and anti-God. And it was things that it was doing that happens within Babylon that are negatively impacting God's people. So this is, in essence, the spirit or the attitude of Babylon. Now, the next story I'll share is from Daniel chapter 3. You remember in Daniel 2, Nebuchadnezzar had this dream. He couldn't remember the dream. He asked for the interpretation of the dream and its meaning, and he got that through Daniel, after Daniel's prayer, and God gave it to him. But in that image, do you remember what part of the image pointed to King Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon? What was it? The head. In fact, it says, King, you are the head of gold. Okay? King Nebuchadnezzar liked that. He didn't like the rest of it, the other kingdoms that would follow him. He liked the head of gold. So guess what he did? He made a huge image, erected it in the middle of this land of Shinar where Babylon was, and guess what it was made entirely of? Gold. Nebuchadnezzar was essentially saying, you say I'm only the head, I'm the whole thing. And as he erected this up and he got his satraps and his seers around him, the wise men of the day, he asked that the people would bow down to this image and worship. And in that process, guess who was in attendance? Many Jews. But only a few resisted. They did not stand up, or bow down to the image. They remained standing. It makes you also wonder how many Jews were actually kneeling and bowing down. It's kind of a sad situation. But we see here this defiance. They will not corrupt themselves. They will worship only God. They will not bow down to this image. And so what we find in Daniel 3 verse 12 are that there are certain Jews that are coming. They are set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these men, O king, these certain people, these people that are coming to the king are tattletaling on these three Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, saying, O king, they have not paid due regarding you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. First of all, the most obvious, when we're talking about Babylon in Revelation 17 and what Revelation has already told us about this image and forced worship, do you see the parallel? Right? Going back into Babylon in the old story, you see the parallel. There's going to be a requirement to worship a certain way by this alliance that comes together in the last days that forces worship. We'll get to that a little bit more here in just a few minutes. Verse 15. Revelation 13, verse 15. Look at this. Listen to these words. Just a reminder. He, that is the second beast, was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, which is the first beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image to be killed. This is what happened to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. As the king found this out, he was indignant. And in essence, he said, stoke the fires of my furnace and throw them in there. And that's the story. If you've grown up in churches since you were a kid, or even if you haven't, maybe you've hopefully heard this story. It's a wonderful story that three go in, and as the king's looking in the flames, he sees that they're not dead, they're walking around, and there's a fourth one. And he points to the fourth one, and he says, that fourth one looks like the Son of Man. It's a reference to Christ himself. I think that's also evidence of the miraculous deliverance that God has for his people in the last days as well. When we're talking about the image in the book of Revelation in prophecy, we're talking about not a physical image, we're talking about a symbolic image, a representation of something that causes to worship. And we're going to begin to break down what that is here in a little bit. Jesus foretold some of this would happen in the last days. Tattletales, telling on people they're not worshiping like we're supposed to worship. And here's what Jesus says in Mark 13, verse 12 and 13. Now brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. and you will be hated for all my name's sake, but he who endures to the end will be saved. Yeah. The same things tend to repeat. Have you heard that term, right? History tends to repeat itself. And that's what we will see repeated in the last days. This chapter, chapter 17, which is a repeat of the things going on in chapter 13, these things in chapter 17 are an expansion, a repeating and enlarging, as we said, of the earlier, but also it's a progression. What you read in chapter 17 is a further advanced alliance that turns global. It's no longer the two beasts of Revelation 13. Remember who they were, right? Rome and USA. It's no longer those two. Now it's expanded and grown. And this is what we find in chapter 17. It starts by telling us, well, actually, before we jump right into that, I want to go back a little bit. In Revelation 12, there's a story of this war that goes on in heaven, and the dragon is fighting against God, and the dragon represents the serpent and Satan. And there's another character that we just kind of haven't touched on, and that is this woman that is seen in that first verse. It starts out in Revelation 12 by saying there's this sign in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. This is a kind of a pure woman, a pure representation. But a representation of what? A representation of the church, of God's people, in various phases. The church of Israel, national Israel at the time, and later the church that also has incorporated and brought in the Gentiles through the everlasting gospel that has been preached around the world. And we can say this very comfortably because throughout the Bible, God repeatedly refers to his people as his bride or a woman. One short verse I included here just to show you some of that. Jeremiah 6:2 saying, I have likened the daughter of Zion to a lovely and delicate woman. Okay? So if she's dressed in white, got a garland around her, she is pure. Okay? So the church is the object of God's desire because it sees her as his being espoused to him, and he cares for her and will nurture her and watch over her all the way to the end when he ends up bringing her into his kingdom along with the city that he builds for her. Now, throughout that chapter, Satan is pursuing the woman to destroy her. So you see it kind of winding through this part where this woman's going to give birth to the child. The child is capitalized, by the way. That's Jesus. So this woman represents Israel at the time of Christ's first advent. Then over time it transitions. And you see in verse 17 of Revelation 12, it says that the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. This word rest is also translated remnant, because the word itself means the last piece, the residue, the stuff at the end. Anybody go to like a fabric store? I know Rochelle doesn't have to raise her hand. She goes there all the time. But they have the smaller pieces that are left. What do they call them? Remnants. Okay? Same meaning, same kind of thing. The word is loipoi in Greek. And that's the word used here. Okay? So the dragon is enraged with the woman. It means that Christ, after he ascends to heaven, who does Satan go after? The church, this woman that's pure. And so we've been talking a bit about how, deception comes from within the church. There are the people that sneak in with false doctrine, corrupts the church from within. It's not outside, it comes within. And you're going to see clear evidence of that here in just a moment. Because in contrast to this faithful church that Satan begins to go after, we find in Revelation 17 these words in the first two verses. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with me, saying, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great woman." What does it say there? Well, woman's a harlot. Harlot's a woman? I mean, no. This woman is specifically being described as a harlot, right? She's a harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth commit fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Strong language there. And I'm trying not to dive into the weeds here. I'm just trying to give the overview, because the overview is sometimes the most important part. And that is this. The woman being described here, the harlot, is the antithesis of the woman being described in chapter 12, who's not a harlot. She's faithful. Do you see the two in comparison here? So when we read Revelation 13 about the sea beast and the description of the sea beast, and it persecutes the saints and all these things that it did, well, now when you move over to Revelation 17, the same entity with the same characteristics is being described as a harlot, meaning this is a church. There is no doubt. So, you look at the first in Revelation 13, it's a sea beast. How do you get to church there? Well, you see the language is worship. There's indications. But here on repeat and enlarge, the detail, it comes out and it basically says it. This is a harlot. It's a woman and it's a corrupted church, which is what it represents. We've already introduced her. Only it's not described as her in Revelation 13. It's described as the sea beast that was wounded. But now in Revelation 17, it has fully healed. It's gotten to the point where this wound is no longer holding her back. She's fully risen to power, and she's now on a global stage. It says she sits on many waters. In verse 15 tells us that those waters are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. This is like people everywhere around the globe. She sits in control over them. The kings of the earth also, it says, commit fornication with her. They have an illicit relationship with her. They're united with her. And why is it illicit? Because she's a church and they are state. Remember we talked about the mixing between church and state? That never ends up in liberty. It always ends up in oppression. I even can't think of a theocracy today or any recent past that hasn't ended with the slaughtering of millions of people even. So this is the illicit relationship it's talking about here. Also, it says that the inhabitants of the earth, that means the whole earth, the people that dwell in it, were made drunk with her wine, the wine of her fornication. And that is the corrupt teachings of this church. Okay? And we know, we've already identified this church. It was the little horn, it was the sea beast, and it's the harlot. It is the Church of Rome. Okay? And I'm not throwing out anything. I'm going to say this as a disclaimer again. This is not me with a new thing, somebody else. This is a long list of Protestant reformers that all identified Rome as Antichrist, okay? It's only the Counter-Reformation after that where they had to find out something. They figured something out to deflect all this negative attention that people began to take other views, and now we're at where we are today where people rarely even know, they hardly know, that the Antichrist has been here for a long time. It's not just one person at the end of time. No, she's already been here. We are seeing the expansion here in Revelation 17 of the church-state alliance that we saw in chapter 13, but in much larger form. It goes on to describe this in verse 5. I'm not covering every detail, but I'm giving us some good indication of what's happening here on a broad perspective. It says in verse 5, and on her head was a name which was written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. Do you see some of the characteristics here? It is overlapping the previous characteristics of the little horn and the sea beast. It's the same entity. Now, it's interesting that Babylon, that's her title, is described as the mother of harlots. If she's a church and she's a mother, does that give us an indication of what the mother is referring to? But if she has harlots, she has daughters, what is that telling you? There's something about her and her dogma that is retained by her spawns, her seed that disseminate around the earth. They're not part of the mother church, but they are expanded throughout the world. And they are little harlots who follow Mama Harlot. And here's where we can say that the description there in Revelation 13 of the second beast, the beast from the land, the USA, is actually more specifically Protestantism in an apostate form. It is Protestantism that had once separated out or separated away from Rome. Remember the language of the seven churches? She has escaped from Rome. But now what we're finding over the last just 30 years, they are fully embraced again, almost, pretty much. And so the question is, what is it that links all of them together? And we're going to get to that piece here in just a moment. But there's something that involves worship that connects these all together as a family. As a family. Same chapter 17, verse 12 tells us the 10 horns which you saw. And these are the 10 horns on the beast that she rides. She's riding on this beast. I didn't cover that part, but she's on this beast that's red. And there are 10 horns on that beast. And it says the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. And if you look a little further, verse 18 says that this city of Babylon reigns over the kings of the earth. This is the expanded view. This is a globalist movement. This is a global movement that comes together eventually. Now, you may say here, I don't see how this is going to happen, but I'll tell you what, things have changed since the pandemic. Have you seen? So much more is becoming global, and the world's trying to come together to figure out how to handle the next pandemic, or how to handle the next, disaster from climate change, or what do we do? It's getting together. It's not religious right now. It's not in that kind of a form yet, but it is coming together. The setup, the groundwork is being laid. This false worship system of Babylon is looking to conform the world under one single authoritarian rule. And it is a false religious system that will command worship. What is it? What is this dogma? What is it that keeps this family of the mother harlot with the children together? Because it's got to mean something. It's there. It's part of prophecy. What does it mean? What is it telling us? Well, there have already been several indications of that. I read one here just a couple texts ago. Here's another one. Revelation 14:12. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. This is the end time woman pure, and she's faithful because she does what? Keeps the commandments, and she holds fast to the faith of Jesus. This isn't keeping the commandments because she's a legalist. This is keeping the commandments because she loves Jesus. Okay? That is what true worship should always be, because of our love for Jesus, right? Not because we want our own way, we're going to do our own thing, but because I defer, I surrender to Christ and his will. I love him because of what he's done for me, and I will keep his commandments. I will follow and walk in his ways. In reality, the opposite of that then is this false system of worship. And in reality, we know the dragon's behind it because the dragon, which refers to Satan, has made it very clear early on. This is back in Isaiah chapter 12 or 14. It's made it very clear about his intentions. Listen to this verse. This is amazing. How you are fallen from heaven. That word fallen is going to come up again here, by the way. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, how you are cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations. So he's working constantly to weaken them. For you have said in your heart, listen, here's his mentality, here's where his heart is speaking. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation, on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. So if you can't beat the church because the church is too strong for you, you join them. And not only do you join them, you create a counterfeit system whereby in the last days, somehow, some way, you can step into place and you can be worshiped like the Most High. You see now where this is beginning to trend, where this is unfolding and where it's heading. You see Satan's objective. It's going to be fully realized one day. And it's not all these unbelievers, this heathen out there. It's what's going on between two women, two churches, two systems that are diametrically opposed to each other and are destined to clash at the very end. The prophecy about the little horn in Daniel alludes to an attempted change in law. And so if we're thinking about God's people who keep the commandments of God in the faith of Jesus, they're obedient to God's law, right? They're keeping God's law, God's commandments. It would make sense that this little horn, who we know is, again, sea beast, as well as now added Babylon, the leader of Babylon, the little horn shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend or put an effort to do this, shall intend to change times and law. There is something about the law of God that angers this power. And this makes sense, right? If you're going to undercut a government, don't you go after its laws? Yeah. So this is what Satan has been doing for a long time, and he's doing it through this power. Okay? You find in Psalms, in regard to God's law and his commandments, these words. It says in Psalm 119, verse 151, you are near, O Lord, and all your commandments are truth. Concerning your testimonies, I have known of old that you have founded them for how long? Forever. The law of God has always been there. In not written form, they weren't on tablets of stone prior to Sinai, but they were there. The law is the essence of God's character, is who he is. And it's just in written form. We need written form stuff. I'm getting to an age now where I got to write things down all the time. I don't like that. But it helps, right? And God knew he needed to write these things down as well. But he's founded them forever. Forever in the future, forever in the past. His law, his government always has been there. All right, so this change in times and law, let's look at a couple things. Okay, if we've identified who this entity is, who the leader of Babylon is, the Church of Rome, what is it that the Roman papacy did to the commandments that would have changed them? Changed the law? Well, number one, The second commandment about not making or bowing down to graven images, it's gone. If you look at most of the lists going back for quite some time, a list of their commandments, the 10 commandments, number 2 is gone. Okay? They removed it. And the reason they retain the 10 is they split the 10th one into 2. Okay? And so they keep 10 that way. But number 2 is gone. Why would they make number 2? Why would they disappear number 2? You shall not have any graven images or bow down to them. Of course, they say we don't bow down to worship them, or we don't make them to worship them. They just assist in our worship. It doesn't matter. It says don't make them and don't bow down to them. It doesn't even speak to intent. Okay, so that's problematic. And it also tells me if you're removing it, you're concerned that someone will call you on it. Okay? So number 2 is gone. The next one is the 4th commandment about the Sabbath. They changed the day to Sunday. They shortened the commandment, number 1. If you look at the 4th commandment, it is now, because the 2nd is gone, it's now moved up to number 3. So number 3 is the Sabbath commandment. And then it only says, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy, period. That's it. So they took off the rest of it. So these were some of the changes that were happening that Rome, the Roman Church, was a key part of. Here's some references. Specifically, I'll give you several of them. This is just for you to kind of take with you in mind and understand that this stuff is out there. This is coming in their own words. This is not words from outside of the Roman Church, the papacy. It's them talking about and describing the change of the 4th commandment. So we're going to talk about this here for the next few minutes as we close. In AD 321, Constantine issued the following decree titled Dies Solis. And here's what he wrote. On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in cities rest, and let all workshops be closed. All right? So there's this side by side along with the Sabbath. They added Sunday, and they wanted to make sure that the things were closed on that day as well. And for a long time, Sabbath observance was side by side with Sunday observance of a festival that they would have for celebrating something involving their Christian faith. Okay? But in reality, why would they choose Sunday? What is the highest pagan god? The sun. So it was a natural fit. Because they were already observing, it was the high day in paganism, Sunday was. It's a natural fit to create a second arrival day on Sunday. All right, so for a while it was side by side, but then this happened in 364 in the Council of Laodicea. You see this coming out as a result of that. Christians must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath, but must work on that day, rather honoring the Lord's day. And if they can, resting then as Christians. But if any shall be found to be Judaizers, in other words, this kind of derogatory term that if you're still observing seventh-day Sabbath, you're Jewish, then let them be an anathema from Christ. So this language is shifting now. It's a little more harsh. Instead of side by side, it's like no more Sabbath observance. It's all Christian worship happens on Sunday only. From the Catholic Encyclopedia, it says, the church, after changing the day of rest from the Jewish Sabbath or seventh day of the week to the first, made the 3rd commandment refer to Sunday as the day to be kept holy as the Lord's day. Catholic Encyclopedia. Here's a picture of the 2 commandments side by side. Probably could have put this up a little earlier, but you can see the 3rd commandment. The 4th commandment is very long. It's almost the longest commandment. It rivals this first one about not having any the second one, not having any graven images or bowing down to them. But the fourth one, part of it, pretty much it ends here, and it's moved up into third place. It's probably hard for you to see this very well, but the third commandment. And then the 10th commandment is split. Don't covet your neighbor's wife. Don't covet your neighbor's goods. All right, so just an example of what you see there. Why was the Sabbath such an affront to Satan? Why does he hate that so much, that day? Well, throughout the Old Testament, it says that the Sabbath was made as a special time for fellowship between God and his people. He's their creator. He's the one who not only redeemed them, but he sanctifies them, he changes them, he makes them like him. It represents so much to the Christian faith. The devil looked at that thing and said, it's got to go. He did. And for the most part, it almost disappeared. It says in Exodus 20, verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. Who does the Sabbath belong to? God. It's the Sabbath of the Lord your God. That's why, one of the reasons why it's capitalized. The weekly Sabbaths, every week, seventh day, is capitalized. Whereas the lowercase Sabbaths were the ceremonies, the festivals, and other things referring to ceremonial days, observances in the law of Moses. So 2 different things. In it you shall do no work. And then it picks up in verse 11. For in 6 days the Lord made heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and did what? Hallowed it. Where is it referencing for the authority or the initial establishment of the Sabbath? When? Creation. 6 days God created. On the seventh day he rested, he sanctified, he blessed the day, and he said, this is mine. I invite you to spend time with me in it. The Sabbath is a beautiful thing. It's not a legalistic thing. It's a beautiful thing that God intended from the very beginning. Some have said that the Sabbath contains the seal of God, like a royal seal that identifies the name of the ruler, the Lord, his territory, heavens and earth, and his title, Creator. Okay, all the elements of a royal seal. And we know that the seal of God is given to his people in the last days as opposed to the mark that is given by the beasts. And so we find these rival days at the centerpiece of what will become at some point in the future rival worships, kinds of worship. Will you worship God and keep his commandments, or will you worship at the foot of the beast power and its alliance, who is forcing the world to worship? So I want to move back now to Revelation 14. And I want you to notice this. In the first angel, remember, Revelation 14 was part of the message that goes out that rivals the first Antichrist system that is in chapter 13. So when chapter 14 hits, God's people identified 144,000, a symbolic number, I believe. And this is the first angel. Listen to what it says. An angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to how many people? The whole earth. This message goes out to everybody, to every tribe, nation, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water. What do you think that's a reference to? The fourth commandment, the Sabbath. It's saying the message of the Sabbath will rise up again, will be renewed and spread throughout the world, and it will be directly in opposition to the counterfeit day that is being established and will also go to the world. When that happens, Revelation ends in chapter 18. At least Babylon comes to an end, I should say, in chapter 18, with these words. And it's because of all that Babylon has done that this judgment comes upon it. It says, after these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. Kind of the same language that we just read in chapter 14. Only the whole earth is illuminated. And then it says he cried mightily with a loud voice. Not just a loud voice. This is a mighty cry. Everybody's going to hear this. And here's what it said. Babylon the Great is fallen, has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit and every cage for every unclean and hated bird. And I heard aloud another voice from heaven. In verse 4 it says, saying, come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. Remember, I said this before. Babylon is a system. Little horn, sea beast, Babylon, a system, not people. This is a call for God's people, true, loving, worshiping, committed Christians to come out. And why? Because she's completely fallen. You see, I think we're living in an age where it's fallen, but not entirely. It's almost there. And not only the mother, but the harlots, the babies everywhere throughout Christianity systems I'm talking about. Apostate Protestantism. But in that system, there are God's faithful people. And they will hear this message to come out. It's almost like an urgent plea. Come out now, because the plagues are going to fall. Probation will close. Decisions have to be made, because I'm coming back. I'm going to send my son Jesus to come and take you home. And so we are at the precipice of these days. And if you're concerned about this militant form of Christianity, more aggressive, this is where things are trending. This is where things are heading. Protestantism, Catholicism, it hasn't come together completely, but it's going to. But more than anything, what's most important today is to keep our eyes up. Looking at Jesus, not being fearful of these things. I've read the text before. If you believe in Christ, Christ is on your side, he's with you. What can man do to you? Doesn't matter. This is about following the truth. This is about hearing the voice of God calling you, join me. Come out of her and join me and my people. And that's the call going out today. I would encourage you to consider that call. Talk to me. Come talk to me. Ask me questions. Ask to meet. Let's get together. But if we don't get a chance to get together until after tomorrow, we've got 2 meetings tomorrow, make sure you come back, because it's going to get very interesting tomorrow as to how this whole thing, what the catalyst for this last movement will be, because the Bible's pretty clear on that too.